Most people who go into the forest enjoy trees, and only few see the mosses. But in fact, we have about 120,000 different species and about 1,600 in Europe of mosses alone. Because they are tiny plants, you have to look very careful to see the difference. And if you look close enough, you will notice that the moss plants are a very little forest. And this is one of their functions in nature as well. They are tiny forests for even tinier animals like insects or bacteria living in them. So they are part of today's ecosystem. And the soil where the trees are rooting in is over the million of years accumulated debris of plants. But if you go back in time for 500 million years, all this would disappear. No trees, no soil, only bare rock. So the first plants developed from green algae, from fresh water, and they had to cope with very harsh environments. They had to develop novel innovations, a lot of genes which encode for protective agents, which could protect these first plants, these mosses, from harsh stress like cold, ice, heat, UVB light. And with this capacity, they really could transform Earth to the way we know it. So they gave the oxygen into the air, which allowed animals to develop on land, and ultimately we as humans. But they persisted. Since about 400 million years, we know mosses on Earth, and they did not change much in shape and nature. They saw the dinosaurs coming and going, and they saw us humans coming. And if we are not careful enough with our planet, they will see us going, but the mosses will persist probably. One of the fascinating characteristics of mosses is that they are very adaptive to different environments, and they can withstand drought like resurrection plants, and if you add a bit of water, then they bloom up again, they live up again. They are pioneer plants in the city as well, and they get their nutrients from the air, and therefore they are able to filter air as well. So they can take pollutants from the air and use them for their own bioenergy. So one major step for biotechnologists is to take a specific moss from this environment, very tiny fraction, bring it into the lab and establish a so-called lab culture. So without any contaminating other species, no bacteria, no fungi, to analyze and utilize this specific moss. And so you don't have to disturb anymore the environment. You only take up a very tiny fraction, and then you make a propagation in the lab of the pure moss species. Each moss has its peculiar needs for temperature, for nutrition, for pH. And so this is a very difficult task to transfer a specific moss type, moss species from nature. So it looks easy, but it takes a lot of efforts. Personally, I started very early, so I spent all my scientific life working on mosses. The moss Physcomitrella patens was the moss I started with, and which is now considered to be a flagship model organism. So we sequenced in an international effort the whole genome, and in fact it was the third plant genome ever sequenced to total. And what we discovered is, for example, that this specific moss has about 12,000 more protein coding genes than humans have. One of the questions, of course, when we discovered that Physcomitrella and in fact other mosses as well have so many protein coding genes was, What are they good for? Because mosses don't have roots, they don't have flowers, they don't produce seeds. And what we find analyzing these genes is that they produce much more ingredients, bioactive substances than, for example, flowering plants. One class of these special ingredients mosses have are polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they are important, for example, for the human diet, but they are important for the moss to cope with extreme environments. So they make membranes smooth and flexible. In winter, for example, you see that all the plants lose their leaves or they get brown, but mosses still under ice are green and making photosynthesis. And in fact, some years ago, colleagues of mine from Canada found living moss about 2,000 years covered by ice, by a glacier, and they were able to retrieve this moss, bring it to the lab and regrow it there. So it was still alive after 2,000 years buried under ice. We have the world's largest collections, for example, for peat mosses called sphagnum mosses. And sphagnum mosses are very important for nature or for our whole planet because peatlands store double the amount of carbon than all forests combined on Earth. So they are important carbon storages. And they are very important for moisture. So they have specialized tissues, the mosses. We see, for example, Protonema in the youth stadium, which is growing, for example, here in the bioreactor, which resembles green algae in fresh water. And the moss plant on this Protonema has stems and leaves and making erect growth and coping with photosynthesis and with the sun. And each of these different stadia have different chemical design in it for the specific needs. And mosses are very resistant because they have more and specific ingredients which help them to communicate with the environment and to protect them from attack. So a lot of medicine humans use, but even cosmetics humans use, depend on plant substances. Mibel Biochemistry is the first company worldwide using biotechnology on mosses for isolating bioactive ingredients used for cosmetics. And this is a huge step in translational research and in biotechnology to have ingredients even in cosmetics.
We have the knowledge about ingredients and cosmetics, but then we needed a partner to do that. And we found the partner with Professor Ralf Reschke, who is probably the expert in the field of moss. And so we started this collaboration, which was very successful because we could combine these two knowledges and bring this together to the kind of a consumer product.
First of all, it's all about biomass. So we have to gain the biomass in a sustainable way. And therefore, we found out, together with Professor Ralf Reschke, that you can grow the mosses in a liquid environment. We don't need a lot of water because the water is very limited that we use compared to when you have a greenhouse, for example. And that was a breakthrough to say, okay, we can produce this in large scale.
When we combine biotechnology with sustainability, it becomes obvious for the consumer what is really the benefit of this technology. And this is exactly what we are doing here with this moss cell culture. With that, we can overcome the limitations of collecting moss from the wild or whatever, and we can generate a sustainable product in the market, and this is a hot topic today.
The mosses grow in nature with the help of sunlight. They do photosynthesis, and therefore we have it in a bioreactor where we have LEDs to bring them exactly the wavelength they need to grow. But they also need to get carbon dioxide. So they are actually fixing carbon dioxide from the air. This has to be transported into the liquid system. Therefore, we have to shake it, to mix it, that these gases can exchange, the carbon dioxide can go in, and the oxygen produced can go out. We grow the mosses in this sterile environment for 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the moss species. And afterwards, we have to harvest the biomass. Biotechnology is usually used especially in the pharma environment, and therefore the technologies are developed to work under really clean and sterile conditions. And we see the benefits to have a high quality product without any contaminations. We are going to filtrate the biomass to recover the moss, because the valuable ingredients are within the moss cells. Afterwards, we disperse the cells in a buffer system, and then we homogenize the moss. That's to open the cells again, to release the ingredients into the aqueous system. And we are expressing them by the pressurized extraction. And this is how we gain a huge amount of different substances. And we show then the efficiency of these substances in our studies.
Once we are successful in vitro, we can move on into clinical studies. That means we can test the products in creams on consumers.
I always think mosses are very beautiful if you take your time and look at them, but they are also very powerful according what they can handle in our environment, or even also as a product in cosmetics.
We have established this moss cell technology. So with this technology we can prepare these ingredients based on moss. And the first product has been a very big success, so we want to continue to launch products based on this technology. And in collaboration with Professor Ralf Reschke, of course, we can find interesting new properties of new moss, and therefore we can launch additional products.